Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham Yahweh Shai, Bahasham Ruach Kudash. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. And today we're going to go into the book of Isaiah, the second chapter. And, as you can see in the subheading here, God's universal reign. Now in Isaiah, the second chapter, it's pretty much something that would happen in the future. In this case, prophecy, as Isaiah mentions in the second verse, right, giving you that hint as to when the things that he is about to speak on or prophesy about would take place. Okay, so this is the book of Isaiah, chapter 2, verse 1, and it reads, "The word that Isaiah, the son of Amos, saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. And it shall come to pass," so this is what he saw, right? Once again, this is a vision that he received. And so he speaks on it here. "And it shall come to pass in the last days that the mountain of the Lord Yahweh's house shall be established in the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow onto it." Okay, and so as he lets you know that this is going to happen in the last days. All right, and what's going to happen in the last days is the mountain of the Lord's house. Now, at the time, the Lord's house being the temple, the mountain on which it was built upon was in Jerusalem, okay, or Mount Zion. And so here, as he's saying, right, that mountain, that place, Jerusalem, is going to be established in the top of all the mountains. Okay, and that's on the physical level. And we know that mountains, as you read in the scriptures, at times also are metaphorical representation of governments. Okay, and the reason they are is because mountains symbolize that power, and sort of like supremacy, okay, and authority, because of one, how big they were, right, and two, their height. Okay, and so oftentimes in the ancient world, things that were like, elevated places, right, were a symbol of some form of authority, right, or as I mentioned, supremacy, or like this sense of closeness to the divine. And so that's why oftentimes when you read in the scriptures, even when they worship idols, they would build these groves or set up these groves and these altars upon high places, because it was thought to be that those high places are closer to divinity. Okay, and so when you had mountains, which were natural high points, they were a symbolism of, like a government, all right, or an establishment or a center of religious and or political power. So as we're reading in here, the mountain of the Lord's house, right, as it would manifest, would be that governing body. Okay, but the literal mountain of the Lord's house would be the physical location be in Jerusalem, because that is the actual mountain or hill area geographically where the Lord's house was established. And really that's going to be like that capital in the kingdom, right? The scriptures say Jerusalem, which is the mother of us all. So as it says, this is going to be established in the top of the mountains, meaning that this mountain, this government, this body is going to be known and set as the most important, okay, mountain above the rest of the mountains. Okay, so above any other nations, right, or governments or political bodies, none will come close to that of Israel. "And shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow onto it." Okay, so basically, like today, there are certain locations that are esteemed as very important. And so when it comes to like these diplomatic leaders and so on, they would all meet at certain areas that are designated as like, if there's a gathering, this is where they would all meet. Well, the nations, starting with their nobles, are going to flow onto the mountain, right, onto to Israel, right, onto Jerusalem. And why are they going to do that? One, of course, to bring their gifts, pay tribute, but also to, as it says in verse 3, and many people shall go and say, come ye, and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord Yahweh, to the house of the God of Jacob, and he will teach us his ways. So they're going to come there because, well, let me actually finish the verse. And we will walk in his paths, that is the ways of righteousness, right? The ways of Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai, which involves, when you go into the Torah, right, how to govern the land, how to govern the people, what to do and what not to do. So these ways are going to be instituted in all the earth. It's not going to be a thing isolated to just the nation of Israel, but this is going to be the way of life across the whole earth. And those that are going to enforce it are going to be the Israelites. So as it says, these nations are going to come to the mountain of the Lord's government, right? And as it says, they're going to say, let's go so we can learn those ways, because they will acknowledge that those are the ways of life. For out of Zion shall go forth the law and the word of the Lord Yahweh from Jerusalem. Okay, so that's that location for that mountain. Verse 4, and he shall judge among the nations and shall rebuke many people, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares. So once again, as Isaiah is saying here, the Lord is going to judge among the nations, okay, which is by bringing that judgment, Mashapat, okay, or Yahweh Shaphat that he's going to bring. And as it says, he's going to rebuke many people. And this is going to be by way of the destruction that he's going to bring. That is going to be, because when you rebuke someone, it's to, reprove their bad behavior. And the way the Lord is going to do it is not going to be by words, but by judgment, destruction. Okay, and after that, as it says here, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares. Now, a plowshare, had an image of it. I'll pull it up again. Plowshare. So first off, what is a plowshare, right? A plowshare is a steel blade that cuts the top layer of soil. It is a part that's attached to the actual plow. Okay. So as you can see here, it's part of a plow, right? A plowshare is an important part of a plow. So if you take a look here, right, this is an image. This would be like the plowshare. This would be like the plowshare. This would be like the plowshare. So it has a sharp edge, like a blade, that would be used to break up the earth as it's, being pressed, as the plow is being pressed down. So as it says here, they would beat their swords, right? Because a sword is like a, sharp metal, or whatever material they used for it, steel or whatever. So they would beat that, they would wield it, right? You heat it up and then you reshape it into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. And this is what, if you look at a pruning hook, yep. So you have something that looks like this, right? And so for a long pruning hook like this, similarly, right, you could take a spear, which is also like a staff with a sharp, whether it's iron or steel or whatever at the end, and then you can just rework it, as it says. And the reason it says they're gonna beat them is because when you look at like a blacksmith or metalsmith or swordsmith or whatnot, what are they doing? They're smiting the actual steel, as they heat it up so it can bend to whatever shape they want it to, and then they can get the impurities out and so on. So that's how they're gonna do. The actual imagery would be to reshape or to rework these weapons into agricultural tools. And what that symbolizes is a transition of a time of war to a time of peace. Okay. And that's what's going to happen after the Lord judges among the nations by bringing this destruction that's coming, i.e. the Third World War, with the return of the Messiah, right, to instill one dominance and righteousness in the earth again. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, which means they're not going to go to war with each other anymore. Neither shall they learn war anymore. because now it's going to be a time of peace. O house of Jacob, come ye, and let us walk in the light of the Lord Yahweh. Therefore thou hast forsaken thy people, the house of Jacob, because they be replenished from the east. So as it's saying here, turn back and let's follow the ways of the Lord, because he has forsaken us, or he has forsaken his people. Why? Because they were replenished from the east, which is to say, when you go into that word replenished, it was like to be filled, established, taken care of. And what it's saying in this verse, what Isaiah is saying is, they follow the practices of the east, okay, and use that to sort of establish themselves or satisfy themselves, or build this way of idolatrous life based on those customs, and are soothsayers like the Philistines. And when you I looked that up here, and it has soothsayer, a person who predicts the future by magical, intuitive, or more rational means. What's interesting is, and you have modern day soothsayers today, but what's interesting is that the Lord will give he'll give Israel prophets who will tell you the future, but they'd rather hear the quote unquote future from soothsayers. As it says, like the Philistines, and they please themselves in the children of strangers, which is to say, like they form agreements, alliances, and deals with these heathens. So all of this is that they're shifting further away from the Lord and getting more into the ways of these other nations, which is why it says the Lord forsook the house of Jacob. Their land also is full of silver and gold. Neither is there any end of their treasures. Their land is also full of horses. Neither is there any end of their chariots. That's why it says that they be replenished from the east, right? So yeah, they got silver, they got gold, they got treasures, they got all these things, but they also have, right? Verse 8, their land also is full of idols. They worship the work of their own hands, because a man would carve and build an idol. That's a creation of their own hands. And then they would turn around and bow down and worship it as though it is greater than themselves. So they worship the work of their own hands, that which their own fingers have made. And so after that, the mean man boweth down, and the great man humbleth himself. Therefore forgive them not. Now the mean man is not mean in the sense of modern day English that you would translate mean as somebody that's like rude or arrogant, or some might even say austere. The word mean here in the Old English means it translates to somebody of base or low stature. Okay, and that's why there's that comparison to say even from the lowest, the least of the people, and then the great man, they both or all bow down and serve these idols, and therefore don't forgive them. And when you look this up in the online etymology, right, one of the definitions here of mean, really the 14th century, so Old English, is of common or low origin, inferior in rank or status of persons. So like ordinary, inferior in attainment or skill. So going back to Isaiah 2:9, he's saying here, basically from the least to the greatest, they all worship idols. Verse 10, enter into the rock and hide thee in the dust, for fear of the Lord Yahweh and for the glory of his majesty. Now remember, he's still talking about what would happen in the last days, but now he's saying basically hide yourselves. Why? Because of the fear of the Lord and the destruction that he's about to bring. So in the ancient world, you could hide in a rock, in a cave, right? Be afraid and all that. Today, there are special locations that are built for, as they call, like doomsday. So they'll call it like a doomsday bunker. And so you have here, there are some that are built into caves, right? Like I'm sure we've all seen those movies and TV shows where either the supervillain or the government or whatnot have this like this secret base inside of a cave somewhere. And sometimes you'll see, like, whether it's from the White House or whether it's from their office, they'll press a button, it'll drop their seat down to a low level. They'll go into some underground area, get into some craft. It'll drive or fly through some some tunnels, and then they pop up into some, like Batman, how he had a bat cave, for example, right? And so they'll resurface in some cave somewhere that has all this technology and is like hidden and remote. Um, but it's also like a protected and guarded area with like security guards, lasers, all those things you see in those movies and cartoons. They're real. Okay, so they have some of these bases and these remote areas that they can flee to for safety. Some that are built into rocks and caves, and some that are built underground. All right, as it mentions, hiding thee in the dust. Right, dust is usually what you see on the ground. Right, so that's how, at least in today's day, in the last days, that's how they would hide, because they have technology now that allows them to be able to build these bunkers in these areas, in the earth. And when the Lord starts to bring judgment, and basically the glory of His Majesty appears via His Son Yahushai, they're going to flee to those places if they're not already in there to hide. And this is re-emphasized in the book of Revelation. Verse 11, the lofty looks of man shall be humbled, and the haughtiness of men shall be bowed down. So all the pride from Israel to all these other nations, it's all going to be brought down, right? When you have a lofty look, you have this like pompous, proud look, it's going to be humbled. And what's one example of that? You look at some of these World Star videos or these IG videos, somebody's talking, so boldly and proudly and so on, and then they get slapped or punched or threatened, and then all of a sudden, they humble down. All of a sudden, they're like a different person in a matter of 2 seconds, and it took just one tight slap, and now their face looks different. They're not talking. If you walked in on that scene, you wouldn't imagine they were yapping off, acting all proud just a minute ago. So on a grand scheme, this is how it's going to happen. People are going to go from, all this smack and faithless, ungodly lifestyle and living and talking against the Lord and against His prophets, to now a fearful and frightened state, seeking help. Right? So the haughtiness of men shall be bowed down, and the Lord Yahweh alone shall be exalted in that day, because it's going to be a day of dread, of fear. So nobody's gonna be able to stand and lift their head up on high with pride when the Lord returns with that destruction. It's only going to be the Lord. Everybody else is going to be afraid and humbled. Verse 12, for the day of the Lord of hosts shall be upon every one that is proud and lofty. So when it says it shall be upon everyone, yeah, it's going to affect everybody, but the effect that's going to have upon the proud and the lofty is like what we just read up above. They're going to be humbled through pain and destruction. And every one that is lifted up, and he shall be brought low. And upon all the cedars of Lebanon, now once again, right, you have this colon, which connects the subsequent verse to the one up above, in a sense of an expounding or a direct relation. So verse 13 is not a different thought, so to speak. It's still along the same train of thought. But now in verse 13, Isaiah starts to, mention, like, as it says, upon all the cedars of Lebanon that are high and lifted up, and upon all the oaks of Bashan, and upon all the high mountains, and upon all the hills that are lifted up, and upon every high tower, and upon every fenced wall. Now, these, obviously, in a literal sense, the Lord is not bringing judgment to trees and oaks and mountains and hills. Those are like inanimate objects. I mean, a tree grows, right? But like mountains and all that, yeah, I mean, they might get bigger too. They have trees on them. But the point is, they're not the ones the Lord has a problem against. They're not the ones the Lord is going to humble, because a tree is not proud. A mountain is not proud. But these are high places, right? These are tall. These are known for some property about themselves. And so they are esteemed highly. And this is why Isaiah is using them as an example or metaphor to represent the people and the nations. Okay, so when he says here that the Lord it says he shall be brought low and upon the cedars of Lebanon and that are lifted up, that are high and lifted up, he's referring to people and nations, okay, that are esteemed highly, that think highly of themselves, that are proud. So today you have a lot of nations that in their minds, they think one, through their military or their technological advances, they can't be taken down. They're going to be the next rulers, so on and so forth. All right, even really targeting going up to these elites, they have that sort of notion and that mindset, but they're going to be humbled and brought down. Okay. So as it says here, right upon the high mountains and upon the hills that are lifted up, and upon every high tower and upon every fenced wall. Right? Because when you have like a fenced wall, it's like, oh, I'm defended, I'm good, I'm protected. And also a quick precept here. I'll breeze through them real quick, but these are examples where people are referred to as like trees, metaphorically. Right? This is Ezekiel 31:3. It says, behold, the Assyrian was a cedar in Lebanon with fair branches and with a shadowing shrewd and of an high stature, and his top was among the thick boughs. Now, an Assyrian, right, is a person, right, regardless of who it's being in reference to. They're not an actual tree or a cedar, okay, but this is just an example of some of the metaphorical speak the scriptures have. Next is Daniel 4:21, where he describes here, well, verse 20, it says, the tree that thou sawest, which grew and was strong, whose height reached unto the heaven, and the sight thereof to all the earth. This was in a vision, whose leaves were fair, and the fruit thereof much, and in it was much meat for all. Oh, was meat for all, under which the beasts of the field dwelt, and upon whose branches the fowls of the heaven had their habitation. It is thou, O king, thou art grown and become strong, for thy greatness is grown and reacheth unto heaven, and thy dominion to the end of the earth. And this was the vision that Daniel was breaking down to Nebuchadnezzar. So even in his vision, he saw basically Nebuchadnezzar was likened onto this tree that grew. So just an example to show you that at times the scriptures refer to people as trees, right? And government as like hills and mountains. Verse 16, and upon all the ships of Tarshish, and upon all pleasant pictures, right? Which goes into pictures, images, idols. Okay, and the ships of Tarshish were, back then, they were like merchant ships, right? Because they would bring lots of like goods, and they were built to be able to last long voyages. So they would be ships used to like travel to like Americas and different regions to get these goods and so on and so forth. Well, all of those and the idols and all of that are going to be pretty much destroyed and taken down as a result of the day of the Lord. Verse 17, and the loftiness of man shall be bowed down, and the haughtiness of men shall be made low. And there's emphasis on this because this is what you see today. There's a lot of pride throughout the earth, even from the mean man, right, to the one of high esteem, even from the common folk. Guess what? The average Israelite that walks along the street, or the average Edomite that you see along the street or on social media, they're likened onto a mean man or a low or base individual. Inside of, if you look at this kingdom as a whole, you're on the bottom of the totem pole. So you're likened onto the base people. All right, when you read in the scriptures and it talks about the low people, the base, not the sons of Belial per se, even though majority of people today would fall into that category, but more so like the common folk, right? So even they are proud today. And that's why, as it says, in that day, everybody who is proud is going to be brought down. They're gonna bow. And the Lord Yahweh alone shall be exalted in that day, and the idols he shall utterly abolish. Okay, so that's gonna manifest in a great way. What I mean is, you go to certain countries and they have giant statues of their gods or those they believe to be gods. Some have giant statues of so-called Jesus Christ. Some have giant statues of Buddha. They have temples built. They have all Meccas and all these different places and houses of worship and altars that have these that are used to idolize these false gods. Upon the return of the Lord, all of that is going to be done away with. It's going to be broken and destroyed, whether by as a casualty of war or as an explicit order that is given to search out the earth and to basically break all of those down. Okay, verse 19, and they shall go into the holes of the rocks and into the caves of the earth for fear of the Lord Yahweh and for the glory of his majesty, when he ariseth to shake terribly the earth. And this is going to be when the Lord starts bringing that judgment, when his long suffering is at an end, and ultimately when he sends his son back physically, right, to make his return and to bring judgment and justice upon the earth. They that are going to go into the holes of the rocks, meaning into their bunkers, right, and into their different bases and places to hide, it's not going to be just your average folks, right? It's going to be those that can afford that. Okay, freaking Sam, who lives in apartment 2, cannot afford a underground base or hiding himself in a freaking Camp David or whatever they call that. He can't afford that. Okay, so he's going to be part of people on the surface of the earth who are going to get cooked when the missiles come. But those who can afford these things, which some might not even be in America, though some might. Obviously, they don't set up bunkers only in America, but they're going to hide in these places, because those that are high enough on the pyramid to know to build these bunkers and these places also know what's happening when it's happening. Meaning, when the Lord returns, they know what's going on. They know that that's the Lord. They know that's his son. And they know what he's here to do, and that's why they're hiding. Verse 20, in that day a man shall cast his idols of silver and his idols of gold, which they made each one for himself to worship, to the moles and to the bats. To say, at that point, regardless of how attached these people are to their idols and these false beliefs, they're pretty much like, the visual is like, imagine somebody who created this idol. They always bow down and worship it and serve it. And then chaos comes, that's so much, they forget completely about that idol. They throw that joint somewhere, leave it abandoned somewhere, and they themselves flee to try and save their lives. Okay, so you can imagine in the modern day manifestation, a lot of these people are going to realize that their Jesus Christ, their little ornaments that the cross that they hold and kiss, and all these different things that they worship are going to be for naught. And they're going to, a lot of them are going to abandon those to try and save their lives. Okay, be it physically or mentally, right? Some people, I think it was in The Purge, either in the movie or the TV show, when things started getting bad, where was the some of the most populated places where people fled to? Churches. Okay, a lot of people fled into a church. I think they showed that also in there's a TV show called Containment, and then there's also The Walking Dead, right? A lot of people fled into churches, barricaded themselves in there, because they look up at that little picture of Mary or the white Jesus, hoping that, okay, I'm in the house of God, so please protect me. In that day, they're not gonna be running into churches, they're gonna be running out of that. All right. So verse 21, it says here, so in essence, verse 20 is saying that they're going to abandon, right, as it says, those idols for fear. Verse 21, to go into the clefts of the rocks and into the tops of the ragged rocks for fear of the Lord Yahweh and for the glory of his majesty, when he ariseth to shake terribly the earth. Cease ye from man, whose breath is in his nostrils, for wherein is he to be accounted of? Right? So in verse 21, as Isaiah has reemphasized throughout, right? The day of the Lord being so great, right, in both majesty and fear, it's going to cause a lot of people to run, to flee, to try and hide. But in verse 22, as it says, cease ye from man, as in, like, don't put your trust in man, whose breath is in his nostrils, and that symbolizes the mortality, all right, of man. Ending it off here, for wherein is he to be accounted of, which is to say, like, really, what good can like man do for you, right? Especially in this time. And so that brings us to the end of the book of Isaiah, the 2nd chapter, right? As we went through, this is mainly like a prophecy, mainly prophetic concerning the things that would happen in the last days, more so the judgment, all right, or the great day of the Lord's judgment, upon which all the proud would be brought down, and all these idols and all these people with a false sense of security, all of that is going to be sent out the window, just like that. So with that, Lord willing, this was edifying to the elect. In closing, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham Yahweh Shai, Bahasham Recha Kodesh. And until next time, Shalom.